May we come to Jesus with hearts wide open, using our vulnerability as our strength. So, being vulnerable with you right now, I have once listened to an incredible sermon on David and Goliath that I've been thinking for about the last 6 or 7 years. Will I ever hear this story the same? Reverend Dr. Tracy Blackman preached an incredible sermon in All Saints Episcopal Church in Pasadena, California, probably almost 10 years ago, I would say. And she reminded everybody who was listening, when they heard the story of David and Goliath, she reminded us that most of us like to put ourselves in the position as David, the hero of the story, the little guy. But what if that's not always true? And what if that really doesn't speak to us as a collective here in this room? Nobody likes to see themselves as Goliath either. No, yes, nobody likes to see themselves as the big antagonist of the story. The one who fights the hero, but then loses the battle at the end. But what if we are neither in this story? Reverend Blackman encouraged the congregation who was gathered to understand that Goliath didn't just appear out of anywhere. He was raised up. He was raised up out of the Philistines. He came from the people, and they chose him to be their leader in that battle. He did not come alone. And I think about this a lot. I think about this in our collective actions as a church. I think about this as our place in Des Moines and how we see ourselves fitting in. I see this as a church who is gathering right now for General Convention, where Episcopalians from all over gathered this weekend for a revival and now are tasked with the great work of the church ahead. And I wonder, did we all, or are we all, the Philistines? I think of this when it comes to supporting power, to supporting unchecked authority in different systems. Some of us are tempted to go straight to that political system. Some of us are tempted to go straight into the system that is the church, while other of us are sitting in our own lives thinking about family systems and the ones closest to us. And I ask myself, in these systems in which I exist, in the body that I exist in, when have I been a Philistine? When have I been so comfortable to maybe complain about a problem but do nothing about it? When have I been so comfortable in my straightness and my whiteness that I can't be bothered to stand up for anything else? When have I buddied up with systems of oppression out of self-preservation? And I think about this I really think about the issue of gun violence that Nancy brings to our attention every June when she puts the orange ribbons out on the front of the church and has us wearing our orange shirts so that we can stand up for gun violence. That is us rejecting the Philistine within us when we come together as a collective to reject the gun violence that is happening in our community. I've been at East High School for the vigil for the students who died in the East High School shooting. We've all witnessed what happened in Perry, and we understand what's happening in the Oak Ridge neighborhood right now after a child has lost their life. We see gun violence in our city, particularly in areas populated by poor communities, working class communities, communities with single parent homes, communities of color. And I think to myself, how many people in this room who do not live close to these communities have taken such action to prevent gun violence? How many of us have taken action to prevent the gun violence that is done in our names? This week I was at camp, and I got to hang out with a bunch of really cool kids who have vast imaginations. And they take church very literally. And I want to tell you this really cool story about celebrating the Eucharist, where in the liturgy that we used language for an invitation around the table. And the exact words, you might remember this, if anybody has come here for a taste and see service on a Wednesday night, you hear the invitation to gather around the resurrection table. So that's what the kids did. They stood up and they gathered around the resurrection table. But they were not the Episcopal kids that I thought that they might be. And they didn't stand back. They didn't avoid the front pews. Thank you, Marilee, for sitting there today. They didn't avoid the front pews. They got so close, and they crowded in, and they touched the altar, and they wanted to be a part of everything. Because they knew that they had a place there. They knew that they could bring their whole selves, their whole curious, quiet, interested, introverted, and extroverted selves to the table, just as they are, with excitement. They took it literally. And I wonder what it means to take it literally when we know that we find ourselves in these systems of oppression, and that we have that creative imagination to get ourselves out and to get our communities out. But I wonder where our childlike imagination has gone. And sometimes I wonder why we insist on listening to, we listen to each generation, but when the new generation of leaders is raised up, we have the temptation of raising up these new young leaders to fit into the boxes that we have made for them. And if we are to follow Jesus with open hearts, using our vulnerability as our strength, I wonder what could happen if we say maybe we've got it wrong, and maybe we need to try new things. I wonder what the appeal is of forming and affirming new leaderships, and then expecting them to operate in existing and broken down systems. Fear, intimidation, power, and violence are not new. They're not fresh. They're not imaginative. They're old, and sometimes they're comfortable, and sometimes we use it for self-preservation. But those vulnerable children who came up to the altar, who just wanted to taste and see that the Lord is good, show us the unique problems and the unique creativity it takes to solve them. And really, what we learned through the children is that it happens with mutual aid. We had a buddy plus one rule at camp. You cannot go anywhere at camp without a buddy plus one. Always the rule of three. And Jesus calls us to walk 2 by 2. So I feel like the children, again, are taking things literally and never walking alone. I am a parent. I see many parents here. And I understand that I like Saul and all that he is and how complicated he may be, because he kind of reminds me of the parent that I am sometimes, desperately preparing children to survive in a world of Philistines by dressing them in the armor that is our own. We dress our kids it's interesting how we dress our kids these days. I was watching a little clip online with my kids, who I think are around here somewhere, so they may recognize this, that when you go to the store, you go to Target or Walmart or wherever you go, and you're searching for little boy clothes, you're gonna find shirts with sharks, lions, T-Rexes, and other predators of the world. And then when you dress the little girls, we dress our little girls with T-shirts with rabbits, ponies, and hamsters, the prey of this natural world. And then we spend years teaching our girls to protect themselves from the natural predators of this world. Realizing our place as the antagonist in the other story can push us to our limits. And these are similar to the limits the disciples faced in the chaos of the storm. Jesus, at the very beginning, invited them into the boat to get to the other side. And they said yes, and they got into the boat. The other side is not as comfortable as the side that they were on. The boat was sinking. They reached their limits. We are often in a boat that is sinking, and we collectively all are reaching our limits. But with that vulnerability as our strength that is given to us, as given to David, Jesus invites us to say yes to the chaos and to get into the boat. To get into the waters. And when it seems so rough, we cry out, and it is Jesus who answers in the most surprising and unusual ways. This is the radical change that love makes in the world when we choose to get in that boat and to follow Jesus.